Paul, Donald, I'll let you take it over from here.
Sure. And I'll do a quick intro, Donald, and I'll let you do a quick intro, and then I'll come back to the few of the talking points that we had. So again, Paul Wilson Jr. I've been with the SBDC about 3.5 years or so. I had the privilege to lead as the area director for about a year and a half now. But my background prior to that, I've probably been doing small business consulting probably close to 20 years. Supply chain management is kind of where I started, and from a career education and career standpoint. But just really passionate about working with entrepreneurs and business owners, and really helping them understand strategically how to grow their businesses. And that's a lot of what I do in terms of my one-on-one consulting now under that SBDC umbrella. Although we really help businesses almost in every single area that you can think of. Don't want to give you the whole SBDC spiel right now, but if you need help with your business, if it's anything other than taxes and legal assistance, we could probably help you from that standpoint. For those who don't know, we're at 18 locations around the state of Georgia. Again, the office that I lead is I was about to say Arizona State. I grew up in Arizona. I had Arizona in the brain for a second. Grew up in Arizona, but I lead the Georgia State University office. And Donald is definitely a highly talented, highly valued team member. In terms of probably our senior consultant, not probably is our senior consultant on the team right now. So Donald, you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and then we'll get moving.
Thank you, Paul, and certainly welcome to everybody here in this particular Zoom event. Very, very excited to be here. We're thankful that we were certainly invited to have the discussion. And as Paul said, I'm one of the senior consultants over there at Georgia State, related to our office as it relates to our overall strategy and overall plan, and what the organization is here for, which is to help our small businesses scale and how they grow, and hiring, and basically general consulting from across the board. But my background, reason I'm really interested in it, because I've actually started several companies, still a part of one now, do a lot of government contracting in the federal government. I've grown a company to over 150 employees, and working, throughout the United States on different initiatives as it relates to the agencies that we were working with, as well as having run some franchise businesses and started a couple of here in the Georgia area, more specifically in the Mall of Georgia area, those pieces like that. So my perspective, it kind of shifted in the fact that I really wanted to see how I can really, take the experience that I have and make it practical, and make sure that I can kind of share the experiences I've had at a practical level with a lot of the small businesses here in Atlanta, Georgia. More importantly, with a lot of businesses that happen to be in the North and the South Fulton County area. So my experience level is aligned with Paul's, and we're all about trying to make sure we get these businesses to scale, to grow, introduce new concepts that are out there now, and the experiences that we've had in the past. So couldn't be happier to be a part of his team and under his leadership to make that happen.
Absolutely. So if you want us to jump in, we'll just roll right into it. And of course,
Please do.
Okay. As how I mentioned, we were having a conversation, several weeks ago about strategic planning and preparing for the next year. And one of the things I think that helps overall with that planning is a framework, right, through which you use almost a structure to evaluate and then the plan. Because sometimes, again, like Donald and like, of course, many of you, right? I've been a business owner too, had a consulting business for several years, traveled around the country, working with these several large corporations. And one of the things, right, about this process of always looking at your businesses, if I'm sitting in a room by myself, I may be able to do some great brainstorming, right, and come up with some great ideas. But it's also somewhat in a vacuum, right, because I'm within myself. Right. And I may not be using some tools, right, and or even a facilitator to help really get the stuff that's inside of my head that I may only see one way, and get that out of my head and get it kind of into an arena where I can kind of organize it. I kind of think about, remember that movie, I think it was called Minority Report with Tom Cruise, and they had the digital screens, and they're moving ideas, he was moving things around that was happening on the screen. I think it helps to have somebody that can help you do that with your ideas, right? But not just ideas, right? If we look in the past, okay, what happened in 2020 that you should be learning from to go into 2021. And many of you mentioned some great, things that you learned. And one of the things for me is that you got to keep looking for the problem that you can be the solution to, right? This year actually created some problems that created great business ideas for some companies that actually excelled, either because they're already in the right industry or they may have pivoted, right, to something new to actually take advantage of the problems that were created. And I think as an entrepreneur, you always have to be in a position to be thinking like that, that I can't control the circumstances, but I can control my response to the circumstances, right? I can't control the environment, but I can definitely control how I choose to respond to the environment. And again, if I'm evaluating, assessing, analyzing the environment, I can actually, again, learn from that, pull from that, but then I can create solutions, right, for the problems that are either created or generated by that. So even, when I talk about framework, it can be even simple tools that we may have all heard of in the past, like a SWOT analysis, right? Right, everyone's done a SWOT probably plenty of times, but right, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But one of the things actually we do with our clients is that after, let's say, somebody walks you through the exercise, you have these 4 lists. We actually then go back and prioritize each individual list to say, if I had to say out of my strengths, I have 10 of them, let's say, 1 through 10, I may look at it and say, actually, the first 5 are the most critical to me moving towards my goals. On my weaknesses list, let's say I had 10 too. I may only have 3, right? The other 7, maybe, yeah, I wish I could fix them. But it's these 3 I need to focus on, because there's no way any of us could focus on 10 or 20 things at one time. But what are the most critical things to focus on? And again, and that's looking back, right, over what's happened this year, and going through a SWOT. And that's just one tool, right? There's several ones that you can use. I'm not saying that it has to be the tool. That's just one, right? Another one I just ran across recently. It's called SOAR, right? And I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this one. And this one is strengths, opportunities, aspirations, results. So I thought it was kind of cool. I was like, I'm gonna study up on that, because I can actually use that for myself, but also use it for my clients. It's strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. And if I go back and look at 2020, and whether I use SWOT or SOAR or something else, let me put all the things that we've learned, like in these tools, in these frameworks. And it may give me a different outcome than if I just sat there and just tried to really think really hard, right? Or even, and we need that time, right? We need downtime, go read, go relax, go do those things. But in the context of your business, sometimes you actually need a process to walk through that helps put things in categories, put things in context, that then you can take that next step on the planning side, right? So you take what you learned and then you put that in maybe a different type of tool on the planning side to move forward. And again, some of this, it doesn't have to be that structured, right? But some of it kind of needs to be, because I think sometimes the structure helps you evaluate and think about problems and opportunities a little bit differently than just trying to come up with this next great idea off the top of your head, and without having to actually walk through some type of process. And even if it is a great idea, right? What are you using to vet that idea prior to launching it, right? Sometimes you even need to have a process. Let me vet this idea, evaluate it, right? Test it before I go full bore and launch it. And I'm the king of, back when I was running my business, I'd get an idea in the morning, it'd be on my website in the afternoon, right? I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't test it. I didn't analyze it. It was just like, hey, I'm a great idea person. If I come up with it, everybody's going to love it. How many of the ideas you think actually succeeded? Very, very, very few of them, if any, right? Because again, they hadn't been tested or evaluated. So I'm gonna stop right there. Hand it over to Don. I know he has some things to share about this too, and we definitely want to open up for a conversation, discussion, your questions. But again, just kind of wanted to give you few things to think about from a framework standpoint as you look backwards. And then Donald, I know you had some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, and just actually picking up where Paul left off, these tools that he's referring to in terms of making an assessment for our business become very, very prevalent even in today more so than ever, especially for our smaller businesses. I do want to take some time to talk a little bit about a tool that I know we work with quite a bit in our strategy planning sessions at SBDC. And some of you may be familiar with it, others maybe not so. But the reality is that the current events that we've been going through right now, as far as COVID-19, allows us to take a different vantage point in that. And that's this pest analysis that I'd like to try to talk about. It's kind of a framework. So if you hadn't heard of it, it's been around for a while, but it probably will get a whole lot more attention from some of the larger businesses that have been working with it. But I think there is a real application for it for our smaller business, and it's important to kind of understand what I mean by that. Well, the pest analysis in itself, really, when you think about it, is kind of a framework to kind of analyze the events and trends, kind of the external forces that are affecting your business. And as we can tell, we're coming out of I want to be, a little bit optimistic about it, but we're on the bridge of coming out of what we've considered to be a national and global effect of COVID-19. Something that we have no control over, which Paul was indicating. And that's kind of what a pest analysis kind of does for you. It allows us to look at it from 4 different viewpoints. And I'll go over them very, very quickly. But if we can kind of put our mindset as we kind of move towards 21 and start doing our planning, it's very easy for us now to kind of look externally to see how these kind of events affect our companies, and now try to put a plan in place to kind of prevent it. So moving into 2021, we could do these type of things. So the first one, of course, would be political. So as well as I know, from this very year that we happen to be involved with, politically speaking, I'm not trying to side. Now, don't pin me down on Democrat or Republican. That's not the conversation we're having. But the reality is that is an external force that has a lot to do with how a small business is going to progress. And, in other words, the governmental policies, stuff like tax legislation, consumer protection and employment regulations, all of these different types of mandates that are out there affect a small business. And that's externally. So we might be real, real busy while we're operating our companies in our little silos and our little barrels. And all this is going on the outside. And if we don't take a time to lift our heads up out of the sand, to kind of look and see what kind of environment that we happen to be in, we could get caught up in another COVID-19. Now, what I mean by that, I'm saying that not in a facetious way, but because of lack of planning. And lack of planning is often tied to risk analysis, which is tied from risk analysis to having a risk management plan, which tries and attempts to try to avoid those kind of catastrophes. And we can do a little pre-planning to kind of avoid, or at least lessen the blow should we get experience or have experience from some of these areas. So political would be one. The next one would be, in this particular case, economic. Stuff like unemployment, inflation, interest rates, and other factors that will affect the profitability of your company. Because if a tax rate changes and you haven't figured that out, a lot can go on, not only based on the type of company that you start up, entity-wise, whether it be S Corp, C Corp, all of which are affected by different tax rates. If that doesn't go into your type of planning, there could be some issues that you have. And these things happen external to your business. Again, then sociological type changes, which actually happen to be the S part of PEST. What that does is allows you to look at stuff like anything from a commodity standpoint, operations, performance standpoint. At SBDC, a lot of times that we have access to databases that will give you some indication of how your company can be performing in its marketplace. In other words, benchmarking the data. What does another company that looks like my company in size and structure and profitability, what does that mean in terms of operating in a way that is optimizes my performance and my profitability? Because I think I'm making a lot of money doesn't mean I am when I compare it to everybody else that's like me and they're making more. So you need to kind of understand that from an external standpoint, what is the rest of my industry doing? Although I feel like I'm making a lot of headway because my head is big and my pocketbook is big as well. So what do I need to do in that case if I don't have a chance or a framework to kind of look at that? And then lastly, I'll talk about what I think affects almost everybody is the technology piece of the pest analysis. There's so many different things that are going on today from a technological standpoint, an advancement in technology or an advancement in the way that we do things, analyze data, the way that we kind of create our competitive analysis against our competitors now, even at a business level, is geared towards the technology that we're using and how we can make use of this vast amount of data to give me insight on how I can now operate a little bit better and get closer to my customer or my consumer base. So technology is a huge driver with respect to how I'm going to be looking into the future. It's not the main one. We have to make sure that we look at our businesses as a whole and what our business operations are for. And then, just like Paul said, we have to identify that problem and solve it. But then we got to use technology to help us be more efficient in the way we do that. So collectively, you look at this whole thing, you're looking at the political, the economical, the sociological, and the technological perspective of what's happening outside of my company to make better decisions for the future.
Let me jump in because I think I just heard several good ideas, and both to Paul and Donald, you're talking about tools to organize what might be otherwise chaotic or random and such. And I'm looking for Don. Don, I'm curious, you do this professionally as well. Where's your thoughts on taking stuff to look back and tools and such?
Being and I, as a matter of fact, I was taking notes on both of those and was going to do further research because I think that's something I can bring to my clients in the future, because I've been stuck back in the old SWOT world, and it's kind of how I was trained, and I thought that those were both great ideas. My practice, the one thing that usually small businesses end up finding themselves suffering in is cash. They're undercapitalized, and figuring out where they're burning cash. And then that's part of what I help bring to them is let's identify, those things. But when you take a look at growing the business, I think both of these analyses and both of these methods of taking a look and projecting out your business are incredibly valid and very useful as well. I mean, I have not heard of these, but I definitely will be looking at them for future growth for myself, at least.
And what would be a time commitment for anyone? I heard 3 tools between SWOT, SOAR, and PEST. What's a typical investment in time to get your act together to do that?
I would say, and Donna, you may have some thoughts on this too, of course. If we're under the SBDC kind of frame timing and structure, we may go through 3 sessions, and each session may be 2 hours, and then add a little bit of time of off time. So it could be 8 to 12 hours possibly to go through, let's say, a full strategic planning cycle, right? And that's maybe more in a condensed version. But but in terms of being flexible with it, in some cases we may get really focused on one problem, right, and be very acute, right? So it kind of depends on the approach you want to take. Do you want to look at your entire business and like put a broad plan together, or do you want to focus on something more specific? But definitely, and again, and that's condensed. Some of you may have been in strategic planning sessions that took 2 or 3 full days, and I've been in those too. But we try to respect the business owner's time, and so we try to give it more of a condensed version. Hopefully I answered your question with that. About eight I would say be ready to commit 8 to 12 hours from that standpoint.
And then let me add also, Paul, just to be, obviously there's, strategic planning for a 100-man, 200-man organization is going to be different than strategic planning for a smaller business. The last point I'll make with respect to this question is we don't want to do that in a silo. We don't want to do that in a vacuum. You want to get maybe someone that you have seen maybe over the years, but give you some insight on your own internal process or viewpoint from an external standpoint. So the timing thing isn't so much as I've got to require hours for this to get completed. It's more so how do I put together a framework to get the benefit of where my company is going to go.
And I'll jump in, either Uli or Anthony. I know you've got a good sized business. It's up and running and such. Is there data that you would need to do something like this, or do you have what you need and it's just a matter of time?
We've been, of course,
Uli wants to go first.
we've been doing strategic planning, you know, every year, and it gets more, it evolves, it becomes more sophisticated. And so as we collect historical data, the more robust our projections become. So I feel we have the tools, but you always learn, you get different perspectives, you add more components each year.
Anthony?
Well, it's interesting because the other day we were listening to we were on a meetup, and a particular healthcare entrepreneur, she was discussing how they had progressed in their business, and it was interesting because what she was talking about, something that happened years ago, we're essentially experiencing right now, which is with healthcare. It seems that it's so challenging to get traction. And the way to do that is to have more partnerships, more cooperation, to be even more flexible, and basically trying to connect the dots because there's so many. And it was interesting to hear what she was saying, because that's what we're finding, is that we're progressing more because we're finding more of these partnerships. And we're not building an ecosystem, but we're definitely trying to be one of the many pieces of the puzzle to progress it. So it's both exciting, and healthcare, as you know, how it's very challenging.
So you're finding that the external that Donald was talking about becomes real critical. The external opportunities, external forces.
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
And from my perspective, I think it's very important.
I mean,
sorry, Anthony.
Don, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please. I'm finished.
I think from my perspective, it's very important to kind of set up an implementation plan and track results to it. I've been in organizations that, you know, we sit there, we did our strategic plan, we patted ourselves on the back and stuck it on a shelf, and it collected dust for the next 3 years. And then when we had another business challenge come up, we took it off and we had done nothing with it. And quite frankly, when you do that, you've just wasted 3 days of time. So I think, to me, for it to be a successful plan, it's great to spend that time together to come up with a plan, but then you have to come up with a way to implement it and then track how your progress on those, and being flexible with it, because, you know, there'll be things that creep up, technology changes, political changes, societal changes that are going to impact how you move forward with it, and be able to go back, revise it, and reset your targets again from that.
But what is also fun is when you have a plan and then you look at it a year later, you realize how much you actually have achieved. So it makes you feel good. It's like, oh wow, we did all that. Look at that. That's awesome.
And I'd like to add something to that. What I think is important that you just brought up, which is very valid. And when we hear the term all the time, a lot of us don't really take it to heart. And that would be KPI, the key performance indicator, because that is how you're going to measure the success of whether it's this plan or any plan. But also it allows you the opportunity to be able to determine what kind of measures, adjustments you need to make in order to either get back on track or to change directions in relationship to what your strategic goals were. And I think what Paul was mentioning up front is that when we try to look at this thing, we look at it holistically. We don't want to create a plan to create a plan, but we want to create a plan that lives inside a larger life, so to speak. And so doing a strategic plan is a part of actually creating a total process of developing your business or your company. And then if we use those two interchangeably, then we're able to put the kind of system of checks and balances that you're talking about through KPIs. And so that we don't end up looking at this beautiful thing we created last year that's not for Christmas this year.
I think that's probably a point we're going to stop at. Is I heard come up with what to do it, and then Donald was pointing out what Uli's been doing, which is KPIs. You've got something to celebrate usually, in most cases. So we're going to wrap up out of respect for time, everybody's time. Paul and Donald, thank you. If you need the contact information, it's on the screen, and you guys are welcome to put it in the chat as well. As a quick reminder, before we wrap up, upcoming events, we're taking the next 3 weeks off for the holiday. And then Angie has brought us a speaker beginning of January about discovering your ability, your power to adapt. And for some reason, the blank row on the 18th is Paul and Donald coming back to talk about looking forward. So I think if you found these tools good, it's a great reason to bring some friends along, prospective clients and such, and get into that conversation about how you're going to be part of their future going forward. And then the next one after that in January is Kelly Geis. She's been with us before, and she talks about HR issues, what's hot with HR compliance and such, because with COVID changes, there's staffing and locations and lots of rules that are being tweaked. So with that, one final thought you see from what are you doing to make a living? I'm a small business owner. One little kind of smile on your face that the tacos are not just hot, they're very hot. So with that, Paul and Donald, thank you so much. Everybody have a great day, great week, and we'll see you in a few.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Look forward to next year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. You're welcome.
Bye.
See you
Bye,
soon.
guys.
Bye-bye.